Hey everyone, welcome back to A Bridge Between. I'm Father Alex Andujar,
And I'm Dave Marshall.
and there exists a bridge between us, but there also sometimes exists a bridge between the gospel or the lectionary readings that we encounter in everyday life. So we're here to try to maybe make that bridge a little more sturdy or even shorten it occasionally. And so I want to start off today, Dave, because last time we talked about Are You Ready for Christmas? And that was a good
Right.
discussion.
Right.
But today I want to ask, what's the difference between Christmas 2020
hmm
and Christmas 2022? Because Christmas 2020, we are in the thick of the pandemic, and there's reasons to be afraid because, frankly, there's so many things we don't know or understand. We want to serve our congregations, but at the same time, we want to protect them. And now, 2022, it's not that the pandemic is completely over,
Right.
but we're feeling a greater sense of safety and a greater sense of openness in our congregation. So I'm kind of wondering, in your perception and experience, what's been the difference?
Well, I can answer you better after Christmas is over, but as we're leading into it, my goodness, am I in a better place now than I was certainly in 20 and also in 21. That we talked last week or last time about how we feel like we're on a log and we're running to stand still. You know what COVID did for me? It was like it's like the bishop looked at me and said, "Look, I know you got a job, and I know you can barely keep your breath with the job that you have, but I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to have you run a church during a pandemic. Like if you thought you were tired before, just wait. Like somebody just put like two twin babies in my arms on a log, and now you're running, right? That it was all of that, and then the other thing it took, that one thing that I hope that we carry forward with COVID, is that it took imagination. We really had to dream, and because there was no other option, we couldn't do what we did before, and so now we get to reimagine. We get to try new things, and I failed at a bunch of things. I'm sure you did too, but that's a part of the process, is trying and moving. And so the theme for Second Advent has to do with restoration and restoring ourselves back to the vision, back to the plan that God had, that has for us, and that is coming upon us. But restoration for us is, I don't think we're ever going to go back to Christmas 2019. We're always going to be moving forward, and I happen to think a lot about and pray every day for our diocesan staff, and especially for the churches that are south of Longboat, that were affected by Hurricane Ian. Restoration for them is different than restoration for you and me. Restoration for them is trying to get the power back on and having running water. Restoration is having people show back up because their homes were destroyed. That restoration is a theme that's running through this. And I mean, you have people in your congregation that haven't fully restored from doing the pandemic shutdown, that financially they have not restored. And so this constant yearning for rolling forward. So that's what I'm seeing. And we have this lesson for Second Advent that comes from Isaiah. And before I jump in, Alex, did you want to say anything before we get into the scripture?
Yeah, actually, I did. I really do want to give a shout out to those congregations in the South because it's one thing, a natural disaster is a natural disaster.
Right.
And it's so difficult to imagine what it is to deal with that. One of the things that the pandemic taught me is that there is no end to innovation or imagination if you foster it in your congregation.
Yep.
And I had wonderful vestry members, wonderful people in our parish who said, why don't we do it this way? Or can't we try it, that way? And you really had to be open to listening to these voices. I mean, that's kind of one of the themes of the gospel that we're not going to touch on this week, but it's about these voices that are crying out and saying, well, what if it was like this?
Yeah.
And so for me, when I think of restoration, I think that for many people, restoration is about restoring the traditions that we had to let go of for a while.
Yeah.
Restoring traditions of how we conduct our service, outreach projects that we might or might not have been able to do, just restoration of our souls in that way. Christmas 2020 was a dark time for a lot of people because they were living in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to transmit the service to them online and have them comment live or send emails afterwards saying, thank you so much that the church in some way, shape, or form stayed open, even in the midst of that. And so as kind of you look into that text with Isaiah, I really think a lot about the imagination that God has. We don't always think about God having an imagination, but it is second to none. Especially when it comes to the things that he can weave together in scripture. So I really want to let you get into that because I know you are eager.
I am eager. And one thing I'm thankful for is you and I are on Zoom. I'm on Longboat, you're in St. Petersburg. Yet we're having this conversation, and we're having a conversation. People are listening to us, and they're all over the place, right? That this wasn't even in our minds in 2019, right? Yeah. And in this short amount of time, look at what we're doing. It's fabulous. And again, pandemic's horrible and everything we went through, but there are some of things like this. So, so if you want to try something new, let's jump into it's Isaiah chapter 11. And our lessons begin verses 1 through 10. I will be reading from the Common English Bible, this guy. It is my favorite translation. It's the newest and recently approved by the Episcopal Church for liturgical use. So if my version sounds different than the one you're hearing, it's because we're using the Common English Bible. So we begin verse 1. Isaiah, a shoot will grow up from the stump of Jesse. A branch will sprout from his roots. So a stump, something has been cut down, something has been leveled and destroyed. When I drove into Inglewood to go help out a congregation, I saw trees that were stumps, just wiped out. I saw houses that were just wiped out. And God sees that with God's imagination and says a shoot will grow up from the stump, that God isn't done with us yet. And so that's the overarching beginning of this lesson of something new is starting. So then it goes on, the Lord's Spirit will rest upon him, and a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of planning and strength, a spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord, as you know, Alex, means
awe.
Yes.
Being in awe of God.
Absolutely. And so the next verse, he will delight in fearing the Lord. He will delight in our awe and our wonder. The next line, God won't judge by appearances. God won't decide by hearsay. So God's not going to listen to others and decide about us. God's going to find out from the inside, not by our out exterior, but on the inside. And he will judge the needy with righteousness. Righteousness, the Hebrew core to that is actually generosity. And so God will judge the needy with the generosity of God, and will decide with equity for those who suffer in the land. And we know they're suffering in the land. And so this new shoot God is doing. Righteousness will be the belt around his hips, and faithfulness the belt around his waist. So both this whole sense of generosity and faithfulness. And then we get to where it's really interesting. And this is where you might, those that are listening in might recognize this. The wolf will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat. And the calf and the young lion will feed together, and a little child will lead them. We think of little child, we think of the Christmas story, we think of baby Jesus. Mm-hmm. I think of the imagination of children. How many times have you been surprised by the imagination of your boys?
I am fascinated by the imagination of my children and just what they're able to come up with, especially, the younger they are, they look at things from a very different perspective. And of course, our imagination inherently involves the things that we absorb, the things that we read and watch and listen to. But the imagination really always just astounds me. The thing that I always like about this particular scripture passage is whenever I think of, the wolf and the lamb and, these different animals that, of course, really should not be in the same room.
Right. Exactly.
I think about nature being restored. We come back to that word again. Nature being restored to a time when in the Garden of Eden, animals didn't eat each other. We come to a time when there was a sense of peace. And what fascinates me is that when we think of restoration, we think of the changing of nature. We, as human beings, have a broken nature about us. There's a lot about us that needs to be restored. A lot of the, I think a great deal about St. Athanasius, hopefully I'm quoting him correctly, what was not taken on was not redeemed. I think of having a restored mind, a restored body, a restored soul, heart, all those things, a restored imagination, because Jesus authentically had all of these things in a human way, even though he was, of course, God. So we're looking to have our nature restored. And so in the Advent season, it's kind of like when you clear out some land or you brush off the stump and you're saying something's going to grow here. But we have to do a little bit of our part too to make sure that there's something that can grow there. So kind of when I think of the Advent season of preparation, which is a big theme during Advent, one of the things you pointed out was that we're always preparing. We're always in Advent. Doesn't matter if it's a Lent or the regular season or the Advent season, whatever, we're always preparing.
Yeah.
And, a question that would be good for the people who are listening to kind of meditate on is, am I actively preparing to have a better relationship with God? Am I actively preparing for God to restore me, to bring me into the place that he has called me, or am I fighting it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know some people that their relationship with God looks like a stump, right? That they cut that thing down, they burned it a long time ago, but God's not done with them. God wasn't done with me when I walked away. He just followed me out of the room. That he is always around and doing something new. So how is it to do something new for church, especially during Christmas? How was that received?
Well, I think it depends on what you're doing. I have found, not to be the stereotypical Episcopalian, that sometimes you will hear that line, "We've always done it this way."
Oh, that line. Yeah.
That line. That's
Yeah.
But what I have found is that if you explain things and share in ministry and work with people in a very humble way, people will go along and try what you want to do.
Right.
I remember the first year that I was here, I wanted to do Silent Night at the beginning and everybody come in darkness, which is kind of to me a reflection of the Easter kind of darkness that we embrace.
Yeah.
And people were like, I don't know about that. We always end with Silent Night. And I said, let's just try it, and then we ended on Joy to the World. And all the lights turned on and everybody walked out and it was wonderful. And then, last year I said, hey, we tried it my way. Let's go back to the other way for a year. And people appreciated that. They appreciated that there was a sense of openness of being able to go back and forth. And I looked at and recognized the merits of what they had liked. We talk about the side effects of the pandemic. We're trying to reclaim some of those traditions this year. And sometimes those traditions go away and sometimes they come back even stronger. The key is coming back to that central theme is, what is our imagination telling us? So what about you, Dave? what are some of the traditions for you?
Well, for the family, Christy and I always watch A Christmas Story, the movie, on Christmas Eve, right? That we just have to watch that. It's just a part of it. It's a restorative balance in nature for us to be able to do that. And I I don't remember the first time I saw the movie, but I imagine there was life before that movie was made. Likewise, that I think, the song Silent Night, the hymn, their church organ was broken, as the story goes. And so he got out his guitar and he sang this hymn. And it makes me wonder, who in the church was angry about, hey, who's that guy with the guitar? And what's this weird song that nobody can, the range is too high, and now it's our most beloved thing. And so it takes that type of imagination. And then, of course, Silent Night always has a restorative balance to it. It brings us back to the silence of that night. And the other thing that actually for restoration that came to mind when you were talking about it is the restoration of Florida and our ecosystems and what we're going through right now. Like, we used to take walks at night after dinner and it was still light out and now it's dark. And I grew up in Washington State. And if you think you've heard stories about it being cold and gray and dark and rainy, you don't know the half of it. But anyway, it's the sun would often rise like at 8:30 or 9 in the morning, and it's kind of grayish, and it sits at at 3. But that type of balance, especially for Florida, is that we have to cool down the Gulf. We have to cool down our waters. If we didn't do that, we have even more hurricanes, super hurricanes like Ian and the rest. Yeah. That a part of the restoration is going through a dark period.
And I think you hit something on the head there. And one of the things that I really want to drive home during this Advent season as we come through Advent is using the imagination that God has given us and listening, kind of putting it alongside the imagination of God, who's asking us to imagine not just a new world, right? And I promised I wouldn't go through the whole Aladdin song for us.
Oh, yes, right.
But also to imagine how God can choose to do something.
Yeah.
I think when I think of how I would do something, how I would save the world, how I would make everything right.
Right.
I have my imagination. God obviously has a much richer imagination, because how would you save the world? Right? How would you and I decide to do that? And then God comes along and says, well, actually, I will send my son.
Yeah.
Who will be born of a woman, who will be born of a virgin, and it'll be in this way, in this time period, in this social and religious and political context. There's a reason why it's the best story, right? That is also a true story, because there's no way we would have written it on our own.
We could not have, no.
And so, kind of akin to what you're saying, I really want people who are living in the darkness to not lose their imagination, to remember that it's okay to dream, it's okay to imagine, and that it is definitely powerful to lean on God's understanding and to say, Lord, what do you imagine for my life? What do you imagine that restoration looks like for me? Because frankly, right now, I can't imagine it on my own. So I love the Christmas season because I love to meet the people who say, I'm going to take one step in my brokenness, and I'm going to come out here and I'm going to reach out and I'm going to see what happens. And that's what we talked about in our last episode, being open and available to them. So, kind of coming back to that central theme is that imagination.
Yeah. That one person that's a stump walks into church and they have this little tiny shoot that's coming out of the side of this tree, this just little tiny piece. And that's God's imagination. That's God working incarnationally in our lives. And, one of my favorite poets, John Donne, one of my favorite Anglican priests, John Donne, everything he wrote was in darkness. He was so depressed and down. And, but out of that came some fantastic poetry and writing and hymnody. So it's out of this season of darkness that we have this light, and that's God's design. That's God's imagination.
Well, and it's God's imagination saying, "You're in a dark place right now. I'm not going to leave you there."
No, never.
I mean, I think that is so important. to remember, just as parents, we say to our kids, it doesn't matter what trouble you've gone into, call.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying I'm not going to yell at you.
Right.
I reserve the right,
right.
To be upset, but call me, I will come get you.
Yeah.
And so for me, Christ coming at Christmas time is God saying, call, you've called. I've heard your pleas. I'm coming. I'm coming to get you.
Yeah. And Isaiah says he's not going to judge us by our appearance. He's not going to judge us by what others say about us.
Right.
He's going to judge us with his generosity, right? He's going to give. And what a wonderful restoration all of that is. So Alex, I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate you not jumping into a song about a whole new world. That's great. And I very much appreciate your time with me today, and so that I can have more of a restorative balance and nature to this very demanding season that we're in.
Well, I'm thankful for you as well. I'm thankful that we can sit here and we can really reflect and help others to reflect how to bring, the readings that we read, the central core message of Scripture closer to our daily lives, and to help people see that, especially for today, that the imagination does not have to be static. It doesn't have to be one channel. The God calls us to a deeper sense of imagination. And I love, of course, your take on Scripture and the way that you analyze and bring that dynamic into it. So, we'll keep doing that as we go on for our next episode, which will, debut next time.
Yep.
And we ask people to keep coming back to A Bridge Between. And it's been wonderful to have you. So you guys have a good day.
God bless you. Thank you.